One of the ironic points of this course, and specifically this lecture, is that you should not trust even me. Well, at least not absolutely. The goal of this course is really to make you think, to think about thinking itself. But no one person can be the definitive authority on any complex topic. Besides, as we discussed in a previous lecture, the argument from authority is a logical fallacy, an invalid form of argument. On the other hand, some individuals do possess genuine expertise, and their opinions should at least be taken more seriously than the average person. Expertise, however, is itself a complex topic, and there are many levels of expertise. I would also argue that true authority, if such exists, rests with the consensus of opinion among relevant experts, not with any single individual. Let's explore a bit more deeply what it means to be an expert and the nature of scientific consensus. We rely on experts all the time. Every time you visit a professional, a doctor, a lawyer, accountant, even a hairdresser, to some extent you are deferring to the perceived expertise of the professional. We could not function in our complex civilization otherwise. Imagine if you were entirely responsible for every aspect of your life, maintaining your car, diagnosing and treating complex illness, and reviewing contracts. How about programming your own software, designing the electrical circuits in your house, and countless other things we often take for granted? Even if you can do many of those things, no one person can be an expert in everything. Therefore, it's reasonable to defer to experts and to expertise, to people who spend their lives mastering one small craft or one area of knowledge. Although it's also a good idea to have enough of a basic understanding of important areas of life that you can judge if someone is a true expert or perhaps is just faking it. How can we know? From one perspective, it's not easy. It takes an expert to truly know an expert. But there are some things you can do to judge genuine expertise for yourself. For example, is the individual licensed in their trade or profession? Can they document that they have had adequate training and have maintained their expertise? Are their views that exist under the umbrella of chiropractic, because chiropractic is a licensed profession. The bottom line is that there is no guarantee of legitimacy. There is no one simple litmus test. There are indicators, but nothing definitive. And there is no substitute for a critical analysis. And this brings us back to the question of consensus, because whose analysis are you going to listen to? But first, let's talk a bit more about expertise. One common mistake is to consider someone who is an expert in one thing to be an expert in all things, as if they can have general expertise. Sometimes experts make this mistake themselves and stray from their true areas of knowledge. We spoke in a previous lecture about Lord Kelvin, a legitimate expert in physics, specifically thermodynamics. By the end of his career, he was the preeminent scientist in the world. But that did not give him the expertise to make pronouncements about other areas of science, such as geology. Engaged in alchemical research without any tangible results. To Newton, alchemy was central to his beliefs about how the world works, as much as mathematics and physics. As one biographer, F.E. Manuel, wrote, "The more Newton's theological and alchemical, chronological and mythological work is examined as a whole corpus, set by the side of his science, the more apparent it becomes that in his moments of grandeur he saw himself as the last of the interpreters of God's will in actions." Essentially, what he is saying is that Newton believed he was uncovering the mind of God, figuring out God's master plan for building the universe, for how everything worked. One piece of that grand design was alchemy, and it was just as much a piece of the bigger picture as was physics. There's another phenomenon that we sometimes whimsically call the Nobel Prize effect, but it is essentially the same thing. A researcher who gets the ultimate iconic award, the Nobel Prize, is often looked upon as an automatic scientific authority. Linus Pauling, for example, is the only scientist to win the solo Nobel Prize twice. Marie Curie also won twice, but shared the first with her husband. The Nobel Prize is, again, so iconic that it is the ultimate imprimatur of expertise, but that did not stop Linus Pauling from adopting fringe ideas towards the end of his career. Linus Pauling promoted the idea that high doses, so-called megadoses of vitamin C, 1,000 milligrams per day or more, could treat or prevent the common cold. He later expanded this claim to include the flu, and more serious illnesses, and further went on to claim that megadoses of vitamin C could help cancer and that high doses of vitamins in general could promote health. His claims were never based on adequate scientific research, and subsequent research has shown that his claims are essentially false. But because of his prestige, he had a tremendous influence on the public. Many credit Pauling for the popularity of vitamin C as a supplement today. Pauling made several of the errors that I'm talking about. He was not a clinical scientist. He was a very successful basic science researcher. The expertise that those experts who do worse tend to act like gurus. They apply their one magic system or golden rule to explain a complex system, and they do so with utter confidence. Therefore, there tends to be an inverse relationship between individual confidence and accuracy. The bottom line is, when it comes to predicting the future behavior of complex systems, even experts are all but useless. They do only a little bit better than chance. But that does not prevent the popularity of asking experts to make such predictions. And the evidence of how they do reveals a lot about the nature of expertise. Those who are more humble, who defer to the consensus of opinion, and who are likely to be very cautious in their predictions, tend to do a little bit better. Those who make the arrogant assumption that their one method can be over-applied to a wide range of questions tend to do much worse and often no better than chance at all. Predicting the future in general is highly problematic. So-called futurism is very popular and may serve a purpose in terms of preparing for possible future technologies, but the track record of futurists is appallingly bad. When asked to make a prediction for 50 years from now, Harvard professor Steven Pinker replied, "This is an invitation to look foolish." As with the predictions of domed cities and nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners that were made 50 years ago. And he is essentially correct. Trying to extrapolate something as complex as the development and application of technology beyond just 5 to 10 years is utter folly. We may be able to make very broad brushstroke statements about what is likely to happen in the future, but specific predictions have a track record of being sometimes humorously inaccurate. Getting back to the overconfident experts, this relates partly to what is now known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. Psychologists Dunning and Kruger in 1999 described how those who are incompetent are generally unaware of their own incompetence. The same failings that make them incompetent also make them unable to see it. This leads to what is more casually referred to their experiments into the possibility of psychic abilities. However, his offers of consultation were refused. The scientists didn't think that they needed the advice of a magician. They assumed that as scientists, they had the relevant expertise to do proper scientific studies and to not be fooled. To demonstrate the need for specific expertise in deception in ESP research, James Randi sent in two teenagers, Steve Shaw, then 18, and Mike Edwards, then 17. They were not trained magicians at the time. Steve Shaw did later on go on to be a famous magician with the stage name of Banachek. But at that time, they did have some skills, and Randi did make sure they had the relevant skills to do the ESP tricks. In the end, they were able to completely fool the researchers with simple sleight of hand tricks, most of which were just ad hoc, opportunistic tricks they made up on the spot. The researchers were overconfident in their research skills, but were not prepared for deliberate deception. In the end, they were completely fooled because they did not have expertise as skeptics. Individuals are biased, quirky, flawed, have incomplete knowledge, and it shouldn't be rejected out of hand. Sometimes it may be difficult to determine exactly what the consensus of scientific opinion is on a topic. Different specialties may have different opinions. For example, geologists are fairly convinced that a single asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs 65.5 million years ago. And this view has dominated in the public consciousness and in the media. However, many paleontologists are not convinced. There was certainly an asteroid impact at that time, but some paleontologists feel the fossil evidence suggests a longer die-off of the dinosaurs. Perhaps the asteroid was just the coup de grace, there are other factors that were going on at the time that could have also contributed to, maybe even significantly, to the mass extinction that occurred at that time. So there is, in a way, two different consensuses of opinion on this question. There's a consensus of paleontologists, which is different than the consensus of the geologists. So it depends on which specialist you ask. What about global warming? The nature of the consensus has been intensely debated within the public sphere. This is he did not accept their conclusions that the planet was warming. So he set out, if anything, to disprove that conclusion. He and his team conducted their own analysis of all the available data. They came up with their own statistical methods to analyze the data, to make corrections for the different sources of data, for example. And they looked at all the data sets that were available, whereas the prior analyses looked at only a subset of the data. They also made their data and analysis completely transparent by publishing all of it online, so anyone could access it and decide for themselves, if they are trained to do so, if their analysis is correct. In the end, they concluded that the Earth is in fact warming by 0.9 degrees Celsius over the last 50 years. Further, their temperature map closely matches that of NASA and the other previous analyses, not only confirming that the Earth is warming, but confirming the validity and the legitimacy of the prior analyses, which were the very analyses that were criticized by the dissenters from the global warming consensus. In the end, Muller changed his mind and accepted the fact that the planet is warming. This is an excellent example of how science should work. Disagreement was resolved by further analysis, by the data. In the end, the data is king. That is what held sway over Muller's opinion. And he should be congratulated on doing exactly what he did: a detailed analysis, replicating prior studies, and ultimately building on the consensus. And in the end, the consensus on global warming was strengthened by his work. Although it doesn't seem likely that this will end the political controversy that surrounds the many types of claims that are being made about global climate change. The consensus of scientific opinion is an important factor to consider when evaluating any claim. A robust consensus should be built on evidence, hammered out in the research and at meetings. It is more reliable than the opinions of any individual, but it is no guarantee by itself of being absolutely correct, as the case with Muller showed that the data always must hold sway, and as new information comes in, new ways of analyzing data, and new ways of interpreting the data, new ideas come to the forefront, the consensus will slowly change and shift. But there are some scientific questions that have been around for so many years, for which there is such a mountain of evidence that the current consensus of opinion is not likely to change ever. I don't think it's ever going to be discovered that DNA, for example, is not the molecule of inheritance. So, while it is reasonable to respect a hard-won consensus of scientific opinion, there is also a role for dissenting opinions. As with science in general, there is never any guarantee of being absolutely correct. The goal is simply to maximize the probability of being correct while remaining open to new evidence, new analyses, and new ideas.